Final Fantasy XII has always been a favorite for me in the series. I played it many times when I was a kid, but does the game hold up as well today? Or is my nostalgia overinflating the experience? Let's find out. The series moves away from turn-based combat to do something a little more free-flowing, but only a little. Instead of waiting for your turn, each character you control has actions they can take whenever, and depending on what that action is, it takes a certain amount of time to carry it through. It's an interesting system. In harder fights, it takes a lot of quick managing to keep your team afloat, but that's kind of the challenge of the game. While some fights were a struggle, it never really felt unfair, unless you were fighting something high level that can just insta-kill you if it's lucky. There is an easy way to manage your party most of the time, through the game's Gambit system. You can essentially code in how the characters think, prioritizing certain actions over others. Having the healer's number one priority be healing, having the archer shoot the flying enemies first, or constantly applying buffs to the party. You get the idea. It's a really nifty system. I wish it had been more robust though, like being able to combine conditions to trigger actions. It came up several times when the Gambit system fell just a little bit too short of what I was trying to program in, but if you're looking for some basic guidelines, it works wonders. You get all of your abilities through gear and your license board. Unlike in the original Final Fantasy XII, where each character has the same full-size license board, the Zodiac Age limits each character to 2 smaller boards to focus their abilities. This forces you to pick and choose your skills carefully, looking for good synergies and class combinations. Personally, I love the license boards and the classes. It adds a certain depth to the strategy, and it truly let me fine-tune each character to how I wanted them to be. Over the course of the game, you unlock powerful mist abilities and summons. I really didn't use the summons all that often, but they were cool. Enchaining the mist abilities was always a blast, and it really felt powerful dealing a massive amount of damage to an enemy. Some of the status conditions were just downright awful. Stop and disable basically remove you from combat. Doom just kills you after an amount of time, and it can't be cured. Disease kills your hit points, and only serums seem to cure it. When I was fighting and my entire party got hit with a stack of status effects, it wasn't a good time. I generally spent several minutes trying to stabilize my team while trying to keep them alive. Sometimes it just got obnoxious. My least favorite mechanic in Final Fantasy XII are the traps. These are beyond annoying. You can use an ability to see them and a different spell later on to float over them, but to constantly be running both of these abilities is such a huge time killer in an already massive game. These traps really didn't add any fun or challenge, they were just annoying, and some of their placements were just downright bad game design. Thankfully, the Zodiac Age has a speed-up mechanic that you can toggle on when you want to play twice as fast. This is amazing for grinding through areas or going down long stretched hallways. I found myself using the speed-up mechanic quite often. Generally when I wasn't in a tough battle, I was zipping through the world as fast as I could. While this is a great addition, it does make me point out the negative that the game needed it in the first place. A game's combat should be fun, and yet in many spots I found myself mindlessly speeding through it, not really experiencing how the combat should be. I honestly can't imagine trying to play the game and travel through the world without speeding through its less interesting padding. My favorite part of the game were the hunts, challenging combats where you track down a dangerous creature and slay it. It was a good way to grind for experience and license points, and many of the hunts offered fun, interesting, and challenging combats. And another positive to the hunts is that there's a fuck ton of them to keep you busy. My next gripe is the lack of explanation of certain stats in the game. After a while, I figured out what each stat was good for and what weapons worked with each stat, but it never explicitly tells you what's going on with that. I found this infuriating. If I have to go look up something about a game online when it should just be in the game, you're not doing something right. And while there are some explanations about other abilities and game mechanics, the game manages to leave out some very important stat information, which in a strategy game about building your character a certain way can be a pretty big deal. The narrative mostly follows a similar plot to Star Wars, and it definitely has some ups and downs along the way. It starts out strong with characters you want to learn more about, but some characters like Vaughn and Penelo don't really grow any more dimensional throughout the story, and the game doesn't really portray the smaller nuances and struggles many characters have, or at least not enough. The best character by far is Balthier. He always had a way of keeping the scene interesting to watch. All that said, the ending did do a great job at tying everything together and tugging on some heartstrings. About halfway through the game, the narrative kinda gets boring. While all the political banter and War of Nations was interesting, our party was off at the edge of the world on some fetch quest for a powerful MacGuffin, and then we do it again, and again, and again. By the time you hit the end of the game, you're just burnt out from all the running around, while the more interesting political maneuvers are only happening in cutscenes. I will say this about the narrative though, it paints an amazing picture of the grayness of war. There really wasn't a lot of good versus evil, just two nations vying for power. There were good and bad characters on both sides of the war, and the narrative offers a better path than just mindless bloodshed. Also, I do think the game missed out on an opportunity to play as more races. 5 humans and 1 forest dweller? Would have liked a little more variety. It doesn't look bad on the PS4 for a game that was released back in 2006, but the remaster did seem a bit lazy. They made the textures HD, but it definitely didn't get any quality treatment like Shadow of the Colossus. It would have been nice to have seen some 3D grass or just improved lighting. Something. The art style itself is pretty good. The world does a good job at feeling believable and lived in, which is a big deal in a fantasy game. Cities are bustling with people, sewers are appropriately filthy, and generally monsters have a good reason to be where they were. The music is incredible, definitely one of the best soundtracks in the Final Fantasy franchise. I could listen to the Rabanastre soundtrack for hours. These fully orchestrated songs really capture the fantasy and wonder of the world, and the battle music always kept me energized and excited to progress further. The sound effects, on the other hand, never really wowed me. Even the noise the traps made, I hated. However, the level up sound is pretty fucking great. I think being a Final Fantasy game, the nostalgia is definitely there, and while the game could have used a little more polish, it was still a really good, well above average RPG experience. And while I would have liked a stronger cast of characters, I still saw myself to the end of the game, where I found myself satisfied with my time in the Zodiac Age, getting a 7 out of 10. This is a fun game with a great soundtrack, decent combat, and a massive, rich world to explore. If you've got nothing else to play, or want to catch up on some Final Fantasy before they announce the next installment, which might be soon, give this one a try. If you enjoyed the review, give me a like and subscribe, and tell me what you thought of the game in the comments down below. Until next time, this is Game Ghost. Stay safe out there.